This is Only the Strong Survive, a podcast powered by Con Media, where we dive deep into the world of business, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Dan Kahn, and I'm honored to have you join us today. So, let's get ready to learn some survival skills together. Hey everybody, welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. Before we get into the details of today's episode, I did want to give you some announcements and share some news. So a couple of months ago, we did our first online webinar, Lunch and Learn. We call it the Con Media Growth Garage. I did the first one. It was based on basically all the topics that are baked into my book, The New Rules of the Road, How to Navigate the Rapidly Changing Marketing Landscape. We had about 70 people join us. It was a great time. We spent an hour about lunch for the first 25 people that signed up, and I thought it went really well, and it seems like everybody generally gave us really positive feedback. So we're doing another one. It's coming up soon. This is Growth Garage 2, featuring our own Krishan Udvadia, who's our head of digital marketing. And Krish is a super smart guy, hardcore car guy, engineer, also just an all-around awesome human and a really nice person. And I'm really fortunate that we get to call him a friend. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think I'm going to learn some stuff. And if you want to learn about digital marketing, the paid funnel, Google ads, meta ads, even just how to kind of target segmented audiences, I think you'll get a lot out of it. It's free. It's a 1-hour webinar. You can watch it on your phone. You can watch it at your desk of work. And the first 25 people, we're going to buy you lunch through DoorDash. By the time you hear this, I don't know if those 25 slots will be taken or not, but it's worth a shot. Sign up either way. You can find all the details on our website at conmedia.com, or just go to our LinkedIn page or our Instagram page and you can see it there. If you also want to get the last episode, the first one of the Growth Garage we did on the New Rules of the Road, I am happy to send you a recording of that webinar for free. And if you want it, just send an email to info@conmedia, KAHNMEDIA.com, and we'll send you the last one we did. It's a recording of the entire call. Or you can email us there, info@conmedia, to get details on the new one we're doing with Krishan. That's coming up on June 13th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. If you're hearing this episode right as it drops, it's coming up next week. If you're hearing it a few days delayed, it's maybe coming up this week. Or if you're listening to this episode at some point in the future, again, just shoot us an email at info@conmedia.com and we'll send you the recording of that one or of both of them. So Growth Garage Part 2, Digital Marketing with Krishan Udvadia. Hope you can join us. Hey everybody, and welcome back to a new episode of Only the Strong Survive, powered by Con Media and Tread Agency. I wanted to get into the details of this episode a little bit before we dive right into the actual interview. I met Jeff O'Neill, who owns O'Neill Vintners and Distillers, many years ago. He actually was introduced to me by a few different mutual friends and clients. And what I didn't actually know until this interview for this episode was an early investor in his business was actually a client and mentor of mine many years later, Peter Mullen, a man that I really have a tremendous amount of respect for. And I was sort of in awe of, because he was sort of a business titan. And I was very fortunate to get to know Peter over the years. And he did sort of take me under his wing, both as chairman of the Peterson Museum and as the operator of his own museum, the Mullen Automotive Museum. And so I really respect Peter, and he passed away a couple of years ago. I did not know. I knew he and our guest, Jeff O'Neill, were friends. I didn't know that he sort of took Jeff under his wing many, many, many years ago. So that was a really cool thing to learn on this episode. But I wanted to get into a preamble, which we don't usually do on this show, because Jeff is a neat guy. Like I said, he was introduced to me by mutual friends years ago, and he hired our agency, Con Media, to promote an event called the Velocity Invitational, which was his idea for sort of an American Goodwood, like a motorsports vintage racing festival that was more geared towards family, gives, the wife and kids as much to do as the dad who likes vintage cars or racing, gourmet food, a wine pavilion. It's a really cool concept. We've promoted it for several years. They've had a couple different venue changes over the years, a couple date changes. It's been an evolving thing. It's been Jeff's passion project, and it's been a really neat thing to see it evolve. That's how we got to know each other. And then through that, I actually got to learn about Jeff's main business, which is the Vintner and Distiller business, which is fascinating because he runs a series of different businesses under that umbrella, ranging from wineries to vineyards to actually like a marketing and distribution company. And if you know anything about like the alcohol business in America, it's a pretty wild business because it's so highly regulated, not just at the federal level, but at the county and state level. So selling any kind of an alcohol product nationally requires an unbelievable amount of logistics in terms of complying with so many different liquor laws in so many different places. We've had people on with firearm businesses and automotive businesses and private equity businesses. So we've done a fair amount of content content over the years on this show talking about regulated industries, but we've never actually touched alcohol. So it was really interesting talking to Jeff and learning from him. The reason I'm giving you this little talk before we get into the interview is at the time of the interview, about a month or so ago when we recorded it, Velocity still had an upcoming date, and we sort of referenced it a few times in the show. Since that interview happened, Jeff and his team made the very difficult decision in the wake of the tariffs and some of the economic uncertainty, especially in Europe, that they had some challenges, with sponsorship and with some logistics. So they decided to postpone the date of that race. We do not have a new date yet. As soon as we have one, I'm sure we will help them announce it. But when we reference Velocity on the show, if you go looking for the date, that's why you're going to see that maybe there isn't one right now. And unfortunately, that sort of development happened after the interview. But there's so many interesting sort of learning moments packed into this interview. And I thought it was such a good conversation that we felt like it was worth releasing it anyway. And it was really a good interview. And I learned a lot, and hopefully you'll learn a lot. And hopefully you'll find it as entertaining as I did. But, I did want to reference the fact that Velocity has been postponed, and fingers crossed coming back with a new date in sometime probably spring or summer of 2026. So stay tuned for that. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Jeff O'Neill from O'Neill Vintners and Distillers. Welcome back to Only the Strong Survive. I'm your host, Dan Kahn. And today we have an awesome guest, Jeff O'Neill. Jeff is the founder and CEO of O'Neill Vintners and Distillers, one of the largest wine and spirits producers in California's Central Valley. Beyond that, he's also the founder of Velocity Invitational, America's premier luxury motorsports festival, which celebrates the true diversity of car culture with everything from century-old race cars to the latest multi-million-dollar hypercars. Jeff is also a client, and I've really enjoyed getting to know him over the years, and I think you're going to enjoy his story. So Jeff, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Nice to be here.
How did you get into wine, spirits, running your own businesses? You have a lot of moving parts in your organization. How did that all start?
Yeah, well, Dan, it really started by accident. My grandfather was an Armenian immigrant. He came to the U.S. in the early 1900s, started as a table grape grower. Back in the 30s, if you couldn't sell your table grapes, you made dessert wine, which was kind of a thing in the U.S., believe it or not, before table wines became significantly more popular. So he had a family business that ultimately I joined in 1980. Went to school, went to work for the family business. And unfortunately, it had been run by his son, my mother's brother. So the bank took it about a year after I joined it. So I ended up essentially working for Wells Fargo Bank. And so the company was really in free fall. And so I worked there for a couple of years. And finally, I just said to the appointed trustee, I'm saying goodbye and going to go do something else. And he said, well, hey, let me introduce you to some private equity guys. So I didn't hardly know what private equity was in 1982, but I got lucky, met some private equity guys. They go, yeah, that's kind of an interesting idea. We'll back you. So I made a deal with the bank, bought these assets back, and that's how I got in the wine business. And I was 27 years old at the time. Started a small company in the Central Valley, California, selling bulk wine and brandy to anybody that would listen to me. And I ended up buying vineyards and meeting Giulio Gallo and being a big supplier of theirs, and just goes on and on. So that's how I got started.
So that's interesting. So your uncle was running it. Sounds like it was having some challenges. The bank took it, and then you used the private equity guys to basically back you to buy the family business back. Is that right?
Exactly right.
Wow. Now, what happened to the uncle? Did he come back or did he stay out?
No, I hadn't seen Uncle Bob in a long time. So there was really no room. Private equity had 100% of the equity. And then I simply just had earned equity from that point on. We grew it to be one of the most significant wineries in California. And then we took it public, and then we sold the public company in 2004.
Wow. How old were you when you bought it back with the PE guys?
26, maybe.
Wow, that's young.
I was lucky. Well, it shows you how stupid private equity guys can be, but once in a while they get lucky.
So in that early version of the business, did you guys own the land, or were you in the ag business actually growing grapes, or was it more of like a process?
It was mostly processing. I mean, we were buying grapes from independent growers, the ones that would sell to us, because obviously we didn't have a very good reputation after going bankrupt. Yeah, we would buy from independent growers. And then my sort of motto to the shareholders were, we need to grow. So we ended up leveraging and borrowing a lot of money from more private equity and actually from the S&Ls back then. I know anybody under the age of 40 doesn't believe that an S&L would loan me $45 million in 1985 to go buy 15,000 acres of vineyards, but they did. And that's how we became the largest grower for Gallo at the time. So we just kept growing it and growing it and growing it. But the family was always run by independent private equity. There was never family back in. Then we sold that, and that's when I started. I started O'Neill Vintners and Distillers in 2004 when we sold the public company.
So interesting. So you sold the original family business, started O'Neill. Tell us, what is O'Neill? Because it's kind of an interesting, but you've got a lot of kind of businesses within your business, right?
Yeah, it's basically sort of a small wine enterprise where we have distilling, where we make brandy and gin. We also have a big B2B business where we're a provider to others. But our primary focus today is really brand development. So we have a beautiful winery in Sonoma, Ramsgate. We have a beautiful winery in Paso Robles, Robert Hall. We're really on this mission to provide luxury brands to consumers throughout the world.
You grow your own grapes, but are you growing grapes for other people, or you're buying grapes from other people? How does that all work?
A little bit of both, but primarily we buy grapes. We deal with about 150 independent growers throughout the state, virtually every region: Santa Barbara, Monterey, Paso Robles, Sonoma, Napa, Lake County. We operate in almost every appellation in the state. And that's so that we can provide everything from a $90 Chardonnay from Sonoma on Hyde Vineyard all the way to a beautiful $12 Sauvignon Blanc from Monterey County.
The one thing I've always because I don't know that much about the alcohol and wine business, but it's always seemed to me like the distribution model is very complicated because you have all these different liquor laws. And even if you want to take a bottle of wine home from a vacation, sometimes that's kind of complicated, or you can't ship it to yourself and it gets weird. How do you navigate all of that?
Yeah, no, it's almost impossible. It's crazy. I mean, that's the result of prohibition being rescinded, but every state saying they had to control the alcohol in their particular state. So there's 50 different laws in 50 different states. So if you can believe that the craziness, we have liquor applications for every single state. We do have business in all 50 states. So we have we have 5 people that do nothing but try to take care of crap like that. It's kind of ridiculous, right? And then some states you can bring a bottle of wine in a restaurant, some you can't. Utah, if you don't buy it from the Liquor Control Board, it just goes on and on and on.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask about is my family had kind of a liquor store chain business in Colorado for a while. And I just remember hearing my dad talk about the supply chain was weird. And just their buyer had to navigate all these really complex sort of Byzantine 90-year-old laws and all that stuff. So what does your distribution model look like? Are you mostly selling multi-step? Is there, I know post-COVID, some states like California, all of a sudden you could buy direct to consumer for the first time. Is that a thing that you guys participate in?
Yeah, really. Look, so there's 2 areas, right? There's the old traditional. We cannot ship directly to a retailer in Colorado, for example. By law, we have to ship to an intermediary, a wholesaler. So we rely on that wholesaler to be able to call on the retailer. So we basically make it, very difficult for the consumer to actually easily get product. But one of the unique windows that's opened up over the last 15 years is really direct to consumer. That's where a consumer really can go online and basically, there's somebody in the back room trying to figure out how to navigate, still comply with the laws. But the growth in direct to consumer, we call it direct to consumer, has been pretty substantial and probably represents 15% of the total business where it was 0 15 years ago.
And I imagine the margins are better if you're selling direct to consumer.
Yeah, they can be better, although you lose out on things like when you're shipping 6 bottles instead of a truck, right? There's a little bit of a trade-off. For any brand that's, if the value is more than $25 a bottle, it makes good economic sense to ship direct.
Well, and if O'Neill is focused on brand building, I imagine that's where the D2C thing can be really helpful, right? Because you want somebody to follow your brand, not just see a label on a shelf at the liquor store that looks good. They're actually following your brand because they like the quality or the taste or whatever it is.
Well, no, that's exactly right. But brand building today, we've learned a lot. We've really been on the brand building business for only about 15 years now. Today, it's a different place than it was 30 years ago. You used to just get it on the floor and kind of make sure somebody had to run into it with their shopping cart. Today, you've got to have, social media, Instagram accounts, TikTok. So you're really trying to touch consumers in a lot more places than you used to, but everybody's got the same challenges.
And one of the things I wanted to ask about is I know that at least we spend a lot of time in the central kind of Paso Robles area. And it seems like a lot of the wine brands now have like some sort of membership or club where you can sort of sign up and you get like a recurring revenue model. Is that something you guys participate in?
We do. I don't love the model, I will tell you, because I think it comes up occasionally a bit short on what it delivers to the consumers. At our 2 wineries, Robert Hall and Ramsgate, we're really trying to change what that experience is like. And it used to be, come in, taste my wine, here, try this, join the club. We're trying to make sure that buyer, that consumer not only gets extraordinary wines, but they get an experience that's unforgettable. And we think that's one of the elements that's missing. And the tasting room business has been in some decline for about, I would call it 5 years. And I think it's largely because consumers today want a couple of things. They want to be educated, they want to learn, they want it to be fun. And I think a lot of our competitors, and maybe including us in some places, we took the fun and the entertainment out of it. So if you show up at Ramsgate today, we'll have owls and hawks, doing our rodent control. We'll have regenerative farming to be carbon neutral, and we'll just, on and on about sustainability. So we think organic farming, we think there's just these amazing topics that are relevant to our industry and actually will be game changers long-term with the consumer.
That's really interesting. I didn't know we were going to get into that today, but where I'm sitting right now, where our office is in Moore Park, there's a lot of ag around us, and it's mostly factory farming. And there's one farm that there's a documentary about on Prime called The Biggest Little Farm, and it's called Apricot Lane Farms. Have you seen that?
Yeah, of course.
And that's their whole thing is like regenerative farming is actually better. You get better product, better for the soil, better for everything. And that's cool. That's a good narrative to share. And so do you tell that story when people come to the vineyard and you actually explain that to people?
Oh, 100%. We take them out in the vineyard. We show them we have a very large trial in our Paso Robles property where we have the largest probably regenerative farm in California, at least on the vineyard side. It's got 140 acres, but we have 10 acres next to it that is our control. So people can actually come into the vineyard. They can see the difference between sustainable traditional farming and regenerative, which of course is, zero pesticides, very minimal applications of any sort of, whether it's sulfur or whatever, and then regenerating the ground. So, but regenerative ground really, it holds water better. And then probably the most important thing is, our goal at O'Neill is really to show the world that vineyards can be regeneratively farmed and carbon neutral. The minute you put a till, and start throwing dirt in the air, you're releasing carbon into the atmosphere. If we can figure out how to do that competitively, it'll be a major win for not only our industry, but for Ramsgate and Robert Hall as well.
That's really interesting. I didn't even know that. That's really cool. And it leads to another question I had. So, a lot of the people we talk to on this show are, some sort of manufacturing of some sort or another, but most of it happens either outsourced far away or within the walls of a factory somewhere, and they have a lot of control over everything. You've also got this other thing because you're using something that's grown where you've got to deal with weather and droughts and water availability and very hot summers. Or how do you mitigate the risk of environmental challenges when you still need to start with grapes?
Yeah, look, I think the grapes have been around, people have been making wine for 8,000 years, right? We have not perfected it yet, but it is a fascinating product. There, of course, is risk. There is, weather risk, climate risk, temperature risk. We're seeing that. We have properties in Sonoma. We have them on the coast. We have them in Washington State. We have them in the Central Valley. We have them in Paso Robles and Monterey. And, and some of those places have been impacted more than others. The lower Central Valley of California probably has been impacted the most, but those were always the lowest priced products as well. So they're not of particular interest, and they're certainly not part of the industry. But look, it is a challenging business. Obviously, it'd be way easier if I was in the seltzer business and I could just, call up some guy in Wisconsin and say, send me a tanker of alcohol and I'll blend it with some flavored peach juice. The wine business is clearly more complicated from an operational perspective, but I also think the end product is so much more sophisticated and civilized. And, one of our goals is to make sure we show younger generations coming into our industry why that's so important, why sustainability is important, regenerative farming, why that's important, being cautious about, we're certified zero waste as a company. We're a B Corp. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
You feel like social good, basically, right?
Well, a little everything, right? It's about 50 things that all ladder up, but it's everything, including from wages and how you treat your people and fairness and quality and sustainability and zero waste and solar. And we have 200 million worms that clean our water, believe it or not, at our big winery in the Central Valley. We have a very cool processing. So we've always tried to be on the leading edge of, every piece of sustainability. And I'll hand it back to you in 1 second, but I have to kind of brag. Our team at Ramsgate, we are going to be the first winery really in California that's doing what we call agroforestry, and that's bringing actually trees back into the vineyard. So you create this biodiversity. It's all of those things that help the land, not just putting, better compost on it.
That's really interesting. So if you're planting trees in the vineyard, doesn't that create challenges with getting sunlight on the vines, or is there?
Sure. But the vines, in general, vines have shade anyway, right? The grapes all grow under a canopy. This is just simply a way to introduce more biodiversity into the vineyard. And of course, it won't cover the entire vineyard, but an acre will have 30 trees in it, for example.
Okay. Very interesting. So you mentioned kind of trying to educate younger consumers. And a couple of years ago, I read a really interesting book called Becoming Trader Joe by the guy who founded Trader Joe's. And he talks in the book. It's kind of a weird book. It's sort of chopped up. I don't know if you've seen it, but
I haven't read it, but I'm certainly no Trader Joe's.
I bet you do. And he talked about in the book how in the 60s, he credits the success of Trader Joe's to the fact that he was listening to NPR and heard a story about how for the first time with the introduction of the 747, you could suddenly, an American could buy a ticket and travel to Europe inexpensively. And his thesis was that travel is education. And all of a sudden, all these Americans who were beer drinkers are going to Europe and they're experiencing good wine for the first time. And they're coming back saying, hey, I want to continue that experience. And it became a hobby and a passion. And then the whole wine industry kind of exploded. And that was his kind of the point of his book. And I guess my question is, first of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, is that still happening? Are young people still interested? Or with dispensaries and all these other things that are happening now, is wine still a thing for young people? Or do we need to educate them on that?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both, but I guess as an industry, I think we should take the blame. I think we've made drinking wine a little too complicated for a lot of people. You walk into a restaurant, I always get handed the wine list at the table because people consider it complicated to follow and I'm going to order the wrong thing. And then the som comes over and says, are you really sure you want to order that bottle? We have created, I think, a mess from the consumer point of view. And what we want to do is turn it all into exploration. There's really no bad decision there, right? I mean, you can drink, white wine with a steak if you want to drink a white wine. I mean, it's not, but we've created all these rules and we said, if you're going to have a Burgundy, it has to be in a Burgundy glass. If you're going to have Cabernet, it's got to be in a Bordeaux glass. You've obviously figured out you've got a hot button with me and how we have talked to consumers. And we got to do a couple things. One, we got to change the way we talk to the consumer. We have to make it more fun. We have to make it entertaining. We have to make it, there is no mistake there. It's just exploration. And once people realize that, whether they buy a Syrah or a Chardonnay or whatever, it's fun and it's amazing. And the work that goes into these wines is staggering. But to your first question, which is what's going on, young people today, they have a lot of different options. They've got cannabis, they've got seltzers, they've got tequila, they've got whiskeys, they've got nothing. Their moderation is the thing for a lot of young people. And then you go throw in little things like Ozempic, believe it or not, when you stop eating, when you eat less, you drink less. All of these little things have kind of certainly put a damper on the industry. But I think it's incumbent upon us to really continue to tell the story of how amazing wines are and where they come from. And, we're not doing this enormous commercial farming operation. We're great stewards of the land. We're trying to create carbon neutrality in the vineyard. So there's a lot of things that are, I think, going on that will resonate. And then the young consumer today, I think they're just a little bit later, right? They're getting the jobs later. They're getting married later. They're having kids a little later. So I don't know. I'm pretty confident that they will realize the great glass of wine while you're cooking dinner, feeding the kids, have a glass of wine.
I think everything you said makes sense. And the Ozempic thing, I wasn't expecting that, but it totally makes sense.
I know, right? Right?
Yeah,
all the things that you don't think about. It's crazy.
On the flip side, it seems like with Gen Z, they're also big fans of authentic storytelling. From what I can tell, less brand loyal in general. It's not like, older generations where it's like, I'm a Ford guy and I'm going to buy a Ford for the rest of my life. Like they don't do that, but they're also pretty open to authenticity. And if you can tell them something that really resonates with their value system, they're all on for that. It seems like you're doing that with your properties. So that's really cool.
Yeah, no, look, the story, authenticity is key, right? Telling that story. Anybody that doesn't believe that telling these great stories and why we're here and the background, and I think that's probably the most important thing we can do today. I mean, it's critical to the success of the brands. That doesn't matter if it's our brand, if it's Patagonia. Authenticity and real stories matter. But I do remind everybody that that kid that wants authenticity and that wants sustainability, they also want it in 5 minutes.
Right.
So I'm not 100% sure you can say I love authenticity and I love sustainability. But by the way, I gotta have that bag of Doritos delivered by Amazon, in 8 minutes.
Right. That's true.
So,
you're right.
At some point, everybody's going to say, well, okay, wait a minute, that doesn't make that much sense. But let's, kind of globally figure out what does make the most sense.
No, that makes sense. I like that. I'm seeing some cultural shifts right now, at least with my own kids, where suddenly I've got teenagers in my house who are intentional about not wanting to be on a phone. And that makes me feel a little better about the future, where it's not everything has to be right now and I'm just going to stare at YouTube all day. So hopefully that'll change a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. Great. Yeah, I'm glad my kids are already, my kids missed that. So that's good.
Yeah, we're getting there. Sorry for the pun in advance, but let's shift gears for a second and let's talk about racing and motorsports. I've heard you say that you've been in love with race cars since you were a kid. Where did that all come from?
I don't know, maybe it's every kid, but my dad loved cars as well. He loved racing. He was always in some very modest way, the car business, whether it was making parts for MGs or, he always had a little shop somewhere doing car parts and things. So when I was a kid, of course, the models I had were the 250, the Maserati 250F or the 350S, or, my slot car was a Daytona Coupe. So I've always loved it. But when I was with my dad, we'd always go to the races and he'd say, so-and-so owns that one and so-and-so has that one. And I thought, shit, I want to drive. I don't want to just look at these things. I want to drive these things.
Where did you grow up? What town were you in?
In Marin, southern Marin.
Going to the raceway, or where were you going to watch the races?
Yeah, back in the day, it was Sonoma Raceway. They didn't even have bleachers back then. You'd sit on the hillside and watch the Trans Am Series in 1968. George Fulmer and Parnelli Jones come roaring through the S's. And little did I know then that I would own that Parnelli Jones car.
I was about to say, you own that car now.
50
How
years
cool
later,
is that?
right?
That is really cool. Wow. So you saw that car race when it was the cutting edge.
Yeah, when Mustangs and Camaros and Javelins were battling it out. Absolutely.
I got the model of one
year newer. There it is, the
car.
1970. Yeah. I've got the 69 with a slightly different paint job.
I like your paint job better. But yeah, I got Fulmer to sign that one. But
cool. That is very cool.
I like yours better. It's real. Okay, and
I've got the model over there too.
So you were always a fan. When did you start getting into actually acquiring some of these cars? Because you've got a pretty impressive collection of some pretty cool stuff. When did that come about?
I didn't start racing until I was in my late 40s, and I was just a little bit of racing, and then I hadn't owned a race car until I was 50, and my first car I had this list of 5 cars that I said, you got to have one of these cars. So, it was either going to be a Ford GT, a D-Type Jag, DB Ford Zagato, at Aston, Maserati 250F, or a C-Type Jag. And anyway, I started hunting around, and I had some friends that knew a bit about cars, and I bought my first car was the 1957 Works Maserati 250F. So that's how I got started.
Birdcage.
No, not the Birdcage, the Formula One car.
Oh,
Formula One car. The one that nose came off of in the back. So it was Sterling Moss's car in 1957, which he ran in. He ran the whole series in it, but he started the season in Argentina with it.
So when you acquired that car, what racing opportunities existed at that point?
Well, I didn't really know. I know a buddy of mine in California had a 250F, so I bought the car in England, and of course I really didn't know how to drive. So somebody said, "Well, you're an idiot. Have somebody show you that knows what they're doing." So they introduced me to this amazing guy named Willie Green, who's one of the most famous European, English, British race drivers, and he's a super expert on these. So I went over there and we took over a track for 3 days and had a great time, him showing me how to drive it, sort of how to drive it. I never did quite catch up with him, but.
So your christening in this whole thing was in it was in Sterling Moss's F1 car. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. One of my buddies, who was already a big car collector and a bit older, he goes, nice work buying the Widowmaker. What?
So at that point, the racing scene for historic cars was very different in Europe and in UK versus the US. Was your plan just to kind of participate in a couple events a year, or just do private track days? What was the kind of goal at the time?
No, I wanted to race. So what happened was, I did my little thing in the Europe, and then I brought the car back to the US. And then it turned out I had one, Tom Price had one, Pete Giddings had one. So the three of us had 3 250Fs that were original cars. So we would always just try to collectively go to, whether it was Laguna Seca or Sonoma, or we even took them down Melbourne one time. But we would all race together. And they were really the only Formula One, 50s Formula One cars in the US that were actively racing. And we had just an amazing time. The three of us, we always had a ball. Then Pete sold his, Tom sold his, and I was there left with mine and no competition. So I moved that car to England, because that's where they all are now. They're all in either England or Europe, and they're all raced either Silverstone, Goodwood, Monaco, Spa, and that's where they all are. So there's very few racing Formula One cars from the 50s. So today I'll race over there.
So that's what so I didn't know that. So that's what got you kind of indoctrinated into the European style racing that's happening at Goodwood.
Yeah, so I run it at Goodwood. I run it at Monaco. That's the one I do pinch myself.
So now you're indoctrinated in, you're part of this world in this community. At what point do you get the idea for what turns into the Velocity Invitational?
It's a little bit like getting back to the wine business. When you have a guest, you might as well treat them great. And I think consumers today, they have a lot more disposable income than they did 40 years ago. And when I would go to the track, it was fine for me when I was racing. But the minute you were out of the car, the food was junk. There was nowhere to sit down. There was no curation. So if you were kind of wanting to sort of learn about cars, there could be a Mini with the engine sitting in front of it and a short wheelbase Ferrari sitting next to it. And nobody knew why they were sitting next to each other. And of course, they were sitting next to each other because nobody cared to educate anybody. And one time, 30 years ago, I just happened to be in England on business, and I'd read about this thing called Goodwood. I think it was the second Goodwood revival. And I got on a train. I was, 30 years old. And I went down there. I just couldn't believe it. I was walking through this grassy parking lot, and people were driving up, and some lady gets out of a BB Ford Zagato, leaves the keys in with the old leather tag hanging down. Just didn't, it's like, it was just fun. And the food was great, and the entertainment and the racing was good. And if you didn't love racing, you could go sit in a pavilion and have a sparkling wine or whatever. Anyway, so I came back and I thought, we have got to do better in the US. I mean, this is just crazy. So that was the genesis. And I kept complaining to the president of Sonoma Raceway. And he finally looked at me and he said, fine, if you think that you can do it, you go do it. So my ego got in the way. And I said, okay, we'll go do it. That's how it got started. But it's, as you know, it's incredibly curated with everything from the food to the wine to a wine pavilion to, special cars. Over the years, right, we've had Lewis Hamilton's 2016 Formula One car, which we broke the track record with.
I was there for that. That was really cool.
We've had all the Ayrton Senna cars, all the winning Formula, championship winning Ayrton Senna cars, plus Lando Norris, plus. So a little bit of everything. But it's mostly about entertaining, right, Dan? It's about how do you create an environment where people, why they want to bring their kids. The kids are blown away because they get to see a hypercar. And then they get to see a car from 1910 that runs too.
I would say that for me is a standout of your event is you've got a wife and 3 kids, and I've been doing some version of this my whole life, and they have zero interest in most of my work events. Like, they don't care. They don't want to go and eat a crappy hot dog. And like you said, sit on like an uncomfortable bleacher or whatever. Like, they're just not interested in it. And I try not to force anything on them. But like, when you can provide an elevated experience like you do, it's a totally different ballgame, because all of a sudden, like, you've got a wine pavilion. You actually make the track look good with kind of greenery and the way you lay the cars out, and even making it accessible. So as people walk around the paddock, they actually are seeing things that almost look like a museum display. That's new for, I think, a lot of people in the US. Let's talk for a minute about Ulf, because I know that he's a part of that organization. I think he's a pretty neat guy. Who is that, and how'd you connect with him?
Well, Ulf Henriksen is one of the most amazing, I guess I should ask him what he wants to be called, but I'll call him a theatrical designer that has an amazing attention to detail. So I met Ulf through a great pal of mine of 50 years, Peter Mullen, great car collector, kind of my mentor, idol since I was, he was actually one of those private equity guys back in 1984. He was one of 10 of the private equity guys. So that's how I met Peter. And then, of course, at that point, I had no cars. He had cars. Anyway, we became just incredibly close friends over the next 40 years. But Ulf, I got introduced because Ulf has been involved in designing garages, instrumental in all of the designs around the Peterson and displays and what have you. And of course, he does a lot of other stuff for the Grammys and, all kinds
Rolling
of things.
Stones and all sorts of stuff.
Exactly. So had him come up. I said, this is my vision, because all you have is a piece of asphalt out there that's hot and ugly, and architecturally, the whole thing's kind of a zero. Wolf said, what do you want to do? I go, this is what I want to do. He goes, well, you can't do it what you want to do for what you think you want to do. I said, okay, I get it. Let's go. So that's how it got started. And then planning, the curating, and then I was lucky enough to meet Ryan Turry, who came on board, because I'm in the wine business too, so I can't do this full time. But we have this unbelievable dedicated team. Brittany, you met them all. They're, people finding cars around the globe and what's going to be cool this year and what's the theme. And so Ulf's been instrumental in the design of that whole operation.
Well, and you're right about Ulf and about Ryan and Brittany. I think you've got a really good team there that it's very clear both in the planning, but also when you're on site at the event, that this is not just, I mean, we produce a lot of kind of like displays and things for auto shows and Monterey Car Week and all that stuff. And there's a difference between a vendor and somebody who's really like a stakeholder. And like, some guy who shows up to set up a stage at an event or something is just a guy in a black t-shirt who doesn't really care. That is not the case with your team. Like you can tell they are just living it every day. And that's pretty, and you see it. You see it when you walk around. It's pretty cool. I mean, I'll speak for you and say that, launching an event business is probably not for the faint of heart. You've shown a remarkable amount of forward-looking resilience as you've built this thing over the years. What's the goal? What are you trying to achieve with it?
Well, I think ultimately, Dan, I mean, my original goal was how do I sort of bring an event together that continues to give access to these amazing cars. So access from both sides. I wanted the owners to feel comfortable bringing these rare automobiles, but I also wanted the guests to feel comfortable coming to see them and to know that they could get to spend time with cars up close where you really can't do that. They're sitting in somebody's private garage in Pebble Beach or, name your state. They're all over the place. And I'm not one of those guys that wants to sit around with three guys drinking scotch, talking about, why I'm so successful. I want those cars out on the road. I want them on the track. People want to hear them, see them, smell them. But the original goal wasn't to make money. It was to create a forum where people felt comfortable not only bringing, historic cars, but new cars, supercars, hypercars. We could show the evolution of technology. And, I think some people would probably say, look, what's O'Neill doing? He's racing cars. That has nothing to do with sustainability. And my response to that is 100% wrong. The reason a Tesla or a Prius or whatever is so efficient today is because of racing. All the technology that came through racing, whether it was disc brakes or aluminum or carbon fiber or
aerodynamics, all that stuff,
you name it. So my goal here was never to make a profit. It was to create an enterprise that we could, if there was a profit, I always wanted to turn it into how do we bring young people into preservation? So how do they learn how to preserve these cars? Because we're losing all of those people. Basically the mechanics are in their 50s, 60s, 70s, some of them in their 80s. Pounding aluminum is almost a thing of the past, right? With all the new technologies and printers that can do just about anything. Preservation, I think, is a real important piece here, and finding those and educating, because I think it's a fascinating business. If you said, what would I like it to be today? I would like it to have enough sponsors where I can say there's a couple $100,000 that I'm donating to education, and we're sending kids to school to learn how to, either do design work, aerodynamics, name your category. But to me, getting the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation involved would be, that would be the win for me.
I love that. So when I was first introduced to sort of historic racing and the car collecting thing, I mean, I grew up in a family of like hot rod guys, right? But we weren't part of that world. I think I was like 19 or 20, and I went with a friend to Monterey, and we slept in a station wagon, and we watched what was then called the Monterey Historics through the chain link fence, because I don't think we could afford tickets. And I was like blown away. I'm like, I need to be part of this. That's so cool. But back then it felt very kind of elitist. Like, and Pebble wasn't even something we were like exposed to, because that was like a bunch of old guys in blue blazers, and we were like definitely not welcome there. But it's interesting because I feel like Netflix, for example, I think your timing and your methodology is really good, because at the same moment that Netflix is producing a mainstream TV show about the backstories of F1, and all of a sudden, like even in my friend group, I have families that drive minivans that aren't car people, and their kids are running around talking about Zach Brown and Lando, and like they have this awareness of Formula One that I don't think existed 10 or 15 years ago in this country. And at the same time that's happening, you're producing these events for the first couple of years that have those people at the show. And I remember the first couple of when it was still the Sonoma Speed Festival, and then it was Velocity, seeing families going up and interacting. And I thought that was cool. Was that intentional? Was the whole point to try and sort of make it more accessible?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, but if you want to make it accessible, you have to have elements that people want to be at, whether it's a wine pavilion or a hot dog stand or a taco stand or a playground. I mean, we have a playground for kids. We have pedal cars. We've got, the whole idea was how do you make a day out of it and make it really fun, entertaining. And if you want to learn a ton about the cars, we've got docents, right? But otherwise come, enjoy the day, enjoy the food, tour the cars, see everything from 1908 to, what the future looks like. It was always about how do we entertain and take care of, I'll call it families, but I've said, it's wives, girlfriends, it's people that are kind of interested, but not that, but interested, but they're not, subscribing to, Motorsport Magazine and reading it cover to cover, right?
It's the next concentric ring. It's bringing those people into the, into the
exactly.
fold. That's interesting. You've been really generous with your time, as a entrepreneur who's built, kind of rinse and repeat all these different businesses, and you've got all these different things happening, and you're clearly very passionate. As you think back on your career in the wine business and motorsports and all of it, what's the biggest mistake you've made and what'd you learn from it?
I think the right answer is I've made hundreds, if not thousands of mistakes. And I think the one thing you learn from that is you learn from mistakes. So, what I tell our teams, I told them the other day, they like to deliver everything to me with a perfect bow on it and 100% done. And my point is, you will never win if you think you have to get everything done 100%, because you get it to 98% and go, or 90% and go. Because usually if it's a great idea, it's something new and it's something innovative, and you don't need it to be at 100%. So I guess my short answer is I've made so many mistakes, I can't remember which one was the worst.
Okay, well, that's a good one. I like, that's an honest answer. I like it. I think you're right. I do. So what you're talking about is a cultural thing. So it's getting your team to have a cultural understanding that it can't all be perfect, and don't hold back. And
a lot of times, when I think about it, if they think about it too much and it takes 3 weeks to get a response, that's 3 weeks. Then there's another 3 weeks. Then it's goodbye. The opportunity's already passed you by, because there's somebody else out there that's got similar idea and they're going to be out there first. So my point is, get out there, maybe the risk is a little bit higher. Get out there anyway. You can always pull it back.
Just move and figure it out as you go.
Exactly.
I like it. Well, Jeff, where can people learn more about Velocity Invitational and about O'Neill?
VelocityInvitational.com. O'Neill, we've got a wonderful winery in Sonoma called Ramsgate. That's ramsgatewinery.com. RobertHallWinery.com as well, which is our Paso Robles operation.
And they're all a fun follow on social too. So I'd highly recommend, especially Velocity, follow it on Instagram. There's a lot of really good content on there. Very good. Well, that is a wrap for this week's Only the Strong Survive. If you enjoyed this episode of Jeff O'Neill, please leave a review or a comment, or check us out on YouTube. Thank you, everybody, and see you next time.
Thanks, Dean.